Thank you for your interest in the Cultural Heritage Initiatives program and for wanting to make a positive difference in the lives of Albertans. This information session is to take a closer look at project eligibility, the application form, the grant agreement, and the budget. I would like to take a moment to recognize that this is the homeland of many diverse people in Alberta, including First Nations and Métis, whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory that includes Treaties 6, 7, and 8. Let's start this information session with the CHIP project eligibility. There are two types of eligible projects. The first one is to document and share stories, histories, and cultural practices of one or more Alberta-based ethnocultural or Indigenous communities, captured through a wide variety of media. Examples could include audiovisual experiences, storytelling, transcriptions, video recordings, or new or existing web platforms. Specific examples of this type of project may include researching and writing for an ethnocultural or Indigenous history book. Costs could include researchers' labor costs, researchers' travel expenses, printing costs, etc. Another example is oral history interviews. Costs for this project could include labor costs of interviewing, recording costs, and transcription expenses. Some other examples are creating content for videos and then creating and publishing the videos, or creating the content for a website and creating and publishing the content on that website. Please note that projects that fall under this category must include project costs for both documentation and sharing of the stories and histories. This information will need to be entered into Section D, questions 1 and 2 of the application form. I will highlight this area later in the presentation. A second type of eligible project is to increase accessibility as appropriate to already developed, documented, or digitized historical or heritage projects of ethnocultural or Indigenous communities. Increasing accessibility can include an increase in the number of individuals that have access to the information, or an increase in the ways that this information can be accessed by individuals. Specific examples of this type of project may include a history book that shows how an ethnocultural or Indigenous group shaped a community within Alberta. The content for the history book is already created, so the cost to make this content accessible would be the printing costs. Another example is videos. Again, the content for the videos is already created, so now the expense is making these videos accessible. This may include expenses related to producing and editing the videos. Another example is websites. The content for the website is already created, so now the project expense will include making this content more accessible by including the cost to develop the website and publish the content. Additionally, already documented stories could be shared in a different form. For example, a book that has already been created is now being presented through videos. This information also needs to be entered into Section D, questions 1 and 2 of the application form, which we will look at next. Let's talk about the application form. This document can be found on the CHIP website for you to download. There are a few areas I would like to highlight in the next few slides. Section A of the application form asks for your organization's information. Please ensure that the signing authority contact and the primary applicant contact are two different individuals. Also, please ensure that the signing authority contact is the individual that signs the grant agreement. Section C of the application form talks about the project overview. Please start by entering a title for your project. Then select if your project will be documenting and sharing stories, histories, and cultural practices, or if it will be increasing the accessibility of already developed, documented, or digitized historical or heritage projects. Next, you will have an opportunity to provide a brief project description. If you have selected option 1, then explain the story you are preserving and how it will be preserved. If you have selected option 2, then explain the story you are increasing access to and how you will increase the accessibility of the story. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to call my project Video Series, and I'm going to select option 2. Next, I will write a brief project description explaining that the content for this project has already been created, so this project will focus on taking the recordings of multiple oral interviews and will create and publish a video series to increase access to the interviews. Section D of the application form is where you enter your project information. On this slide, we see questions 1 and 2 of Section D. Question 1 asks why you have chosen to do this project, how it will contribute to the outcome you have selected above, and why your organization is best positioned to lead this work. Here you should explain how your project contributes to Alberta's history and your organization's connection to the history that is being preserved. Question 2 is a timeline where you can outline the activities of your project. Under each activity, provide as much detail as possible around what you will be doing for that part of the project. This is the only place where you will describe in detail what you are doing in the project, so please expand in this section. This is the meats and the potato of the application. To carry on with our example from the previous slide, I'm going to answer question 1. I know the font on the screen is small, so I will read my answer out loud. Our organization has chosen to do this project because we want to share the stories from the interviews we previously created for the public to view and learn from. Public access to diverse histories of Alberta-based communities is increased by creating a video series that will be published on our website and social media pages for the public to view. Without creating this video series, the interviews that were previously documented would be unavailable for the public to view and have access to. Our organization is best positioned to complete this work because we have already created the interviews of the stories that were shared by members of our organization, and we are sharing our own stories from our own experiences. Now I will fill out the timeline using the same example. On January 1st to January 6th, we are going to review content from the interviews that were previously created. On January 9th to March 9th, we are going to create the video series by hiring a media company to complete this part of the work for us. We are planning to create 10 videos in our series. On March 13th to May 30th, we are going to update our website showcasing the new video series we have created. We will launch one video from our series per week for 10 weeks. We will also post one video per week on our social media and respond to feedback we receive. On June 1st to June 30th, we are going to continue promoting our video series by creating posters and handing them out to businesses and other not-for-profit organizations to spread the word for our project to generate more video views. For the month of July, we are going to focus on gathering feedback from viewers and create an action plan of how we could improve our project for future videos. The rest of the questions on the application form are fairly straightforward, and the answers will be specific to your organization and to your project. Because of this, I'm going to focus more on the grant agreement and the budget section found embedded in the application. If you have any questions once you are filling out your application, please contact our office. The last area of the application form I want to highlight is the grant agreement. This section can be found on the last 2 pages of the application. Please ensure that you enter your organization's full legal name in both sections 1 and 2 of the grant agreement. I will zoom into each page in the next 3 slides. We can see the top of the grant agreement, section 1 of 2. Enter your organization's full legal name here. The top portion of the grant agreement, section 2 of 2. Enter your organization's full legal name here. Make sure to read and check all of the boxes before submitting your application. By checking these boxes, you are confirming that all of the information in the application is true, you have signing authority on behalf of the organization, there is no conflict of interest, and you have read this agreement, which outlines all of the terms and conditions of the grant, including the final reporting requirements. Here is the bottom portion of the grant agreement, section 2 of 2. Please make sure that the grant agreement is signed by a signing authority contact previously stated in section A of the application form. Enter each field of contact information. Lastly, indicate in the checks box if you would like to receive ongoing emails from the Government of Alberta about various programs. Information, including updates to program guidelines and information on new grant programs. So what do I need to know about my project budget? First of all, some of you might be wondering, what is a matching grant? A matching grant is a grant that provides an equal amount towards the project, up to a maximum amount, as the organization does. In other words, we split the bill. The Cultural Heritage Initiatives Program provides up to $25,000 per project. Of that $25,000, organizations that demonstrate financial hardship can request up to $10,000 of non-matching funding. Any requests that require a matching contribution, the contribution is matched dollar for dollar. An example is if you are requesting $15,000, your organization will also need to provide a matching contribution of $15,000. Matching funding can be in the form of cash, donated labor, or donated materials and services. Please note that the maximum funding from the Government of Alberta cannot exceed 50% of the total project revenues. with the exception of grant requests that include up to $10,000 of non-matching. Other Government of Alberta funding cannot be used to meet the organization's matching requirement.
Ineligible sources of matching. Any project expense deemed as ineligible for funding cannot be used as a match. Wages and salary associated with the regular, ongoing operations of the organization, and volunteer time related to fundraising, preparing grant applications, or attending meetings related to regular operations are also ineligible sources of matching. As previously stated, organizations that demonstrate financial hardship can request up to $10,000 in non-matching funding. This means that the maximum you can request of non-matching funds is $10,000, but you can also request less. Criteria for non-matching grant request includes that the organization's annual operating budget is under $250,000 and the organization has limited financial reserves or financial reserves are restricted for other uses, and the organization has demonstrated a strong need for the project. However, without a non-matching grant, the project will cause financial hardship to the organization, and the project will share stories of historically underrepresented or marginalized communities.
Now that we have talked about the matching criteria, let's take a look at the budget itself. Before we get started, I just want to mention that we understand budgets can be difficult, so please contact our office if you need any help filling out your project's budget. On this slide, we see Section E of the application form. Section E of the application form talks about the budget details. The budget is 3 pages, which I will zoom into and provide more detail and examples for in the next few slides. As a quick overview before I get into the details, Chart A is where you will enter all of your project expenses. Chart B is where you will enter the donated in kind details. And Chart C is where you will enter your project revenues. For the sake of this budget, the word revenues is used as another word for contributions. On this slide, we can see Chart A. Chart A is where you will enter the project expenses. Click on each gray box to type in that field. On the left-hand column, under Expense, you will write each project expense. In the middle left column, under Description, you will write for each expense how this expense relates to your project. In the middle right column, under Amount, you will write the cost for each expense. On the right-hand column, it asks if you have a quote for that expense. For each expense line, please click in the box to select Yes or No. Quotes are not mandatory. If you do not have a quote, make sure to clearly document in the information in the previous columns. At the bottom of the chart, total the project expenses. Below your total of project expenses, please enter the total of donated in kind contributions if applicable. Lastly, enter the amount of the total project expense plus the amount of the total donated in kind to equal your total project costs. To ensure your budget balances, the donated in kind amount is considered both a project cost and a project revenue. You will need to enter this amount into both sections of the budget. Now we will carry on with our example from the previous slides. Our first project expense is ABC Media. ABC Media is the company hired to create the 10 videos in the video series. The amount of this expense is $25,000. I'm going to click Yes here because I do have a quote for this expense. Our next project expense is poster supplies. These poster supplies will be used to create the posters we are using to promote the video series. Cost is based on previous years creating posters. Notice here we have explained the cost. The project expense is $500. I'm going to check No here because I do not have a quote for this expense. Our last project expense is 123 Print Shop. We have hired 123 Print Shop to print the posters we have created to promote the video series. The project expense is $2,500. I am going to check Yes here because I do have a quote for this item. I have added up the project expenses and the total is $28,000. My total donated in kind amount is $400. This might seem like a random number right now, but you will see on the next slide when I explain Chart B where this number has come from. When you are filling out your budget, you will be able to see all 3 charts at the same time, which will help you gather your numbers. This makes my total project cost $28,400. On this slide, we see Chart B. Chart B is where you will enter any donated labor or donated materials or equipment. In the left-hand column under Donated in Kind description, you will write each donated labor or donated materials or service. Please include who the donated labor or materials or service is from. If you are recording any donated labor, remember to include the number of hours that is being donated. In the middle column under Amount, you will write the total amount for each donated labor or donated material or service. In the three columns on the right-hand side, you will check one box that applies for each donation listed. Please note that unskilled labor is valued at $20 an hour and skilled labor is valued at $35 an hour. Donated materials or equipment will be valued at fair market value, and these items must include a donation letter. At the bottom of the chart, please total the value of all donated in kind items entered into this chart. Now I will enter in the donated labor for our example by entering 20 hours of donated labor from our volunteers who will be reviewing the content of the interviews in preparation for the videos. The value of this amount is $400. The amount was calculated using a rate of $20 an hour because this is unskilled labor. Our total donated in kind amount is $400. On this slide, we see Chart C. Chart C is where you will enter your revenues information. Here, I will show you how to fill out a matching grant request. In the next slide, I will provide an example that includes a non-matching portion. The top line is where you will enter your CHIP grant request. Under your grant request, you will indicate if you are requesting $10,000 of your grant request as non-matching. Please check the yes or no box. In the chart, enter your matching contributions beside the corresponding funding source. Your matching contribution can be a combination of a cash contribution from your organization, municipal funding, other Government of Alberta funding, federal funding, other funding sources, and the total donated in kind amount from Chart B. You will need to enter these matching contributions under the pending amount column or the confirmed amount column. You will also need to enter the corresponding amounts under the total amount column. Please add up the total amount column and enter this as your total project revenues amount. If you are requesting up to $10,000 of non-matching funds, you will need to fill out the bottom section. If you are not requesting $10,000 of non-matching funding, please skip this section. Now I will carry on with our previous example. This example is how to fill out Chart C for a matching grant request that is not requesting any non-matching funding. I'm going to do some math on the slide here for you to follow along. Because our total project cost is $28,400 and CHIP is a matching grant, I can request half of the total project cost up to $25,000 of funding from CHIP. I'm going to enter my total grant request as $14,200. I'm not requesting a non-matching portion, so I'm going to check no here. Now I will indicate that my grant request is coming from $800 of pending funds from a cash contribution from our organization and $13,000 of confirmed funds from our organization, for a total of $13,800 cash contribution from our organization. I will also indicate that our match will be completed with $400 of confirmed donated in kind. Just as a reminder, this $400 came from our total in Chart B. That means my total donated in kind amount is $400. When I add up these totals, our total project revenues, including our grant request, is $28,400. Please note that the total project revenues must equal your total project costs. Because I am not requesting a non-matching component in my grant request, I will not fill out the bottom section.
Let's take a look at how to fill out Chart C if you're going to request a $10,000 non-matching funding request. Remember, this is only for organizations that have demonstrated financial hardship under Guidelines Section 5.6 that I outlined earlier. The numbers might get a bit complicated as I walk you through this part. I find it helpful to work backwards to figure out the amounts. I'm going to do some math on the slide again to help explain where the numbers are coming from. Remember our example from Chart A? The total project cost equaled $28,400. Now you will subtract $10,000 of non-matching funds from that total. This leaves $18,400 of the budget remaining. Next, we need to divide by 2 to reflect the amount that will be matched funds, which equals $9,200. This is where we are splitting the bill because it is a matching grant program. Just to clarify, $9,200 is the amount that you will need to match in this example. Now to determine my total CHIP grant request, I'm going to add my non-matching request of $10,000 to my matching portion of $9,200. My total CHIP funding request is $19,200. Let's enter this amount into the chart. Next, you will select the yes box to indicate that a portion of our grant request is non-matching. Now your matching component becomes $9,200. $400 of this is the total donated in kind portion from Chart B. Just as a reminder, this $400 came from our total in Chart B. This totals our total amount for donated in kind is $400. Our remaining matching contribution is $8,800. We will enter this amount as a confirmed cash contribution from the organization. This totals our total cash contributions as $8,800. Please add up the total amount column and enter this as your total project revenues amount, which equals $28,400. Now your total project costs of $28,400 and your total project revenues are the same. Because you're requesting a non-matching portion of our CHIP grant request, we will fill out the bottom portion. Enter your total non-matching request in question 1. In this case, it is the maximum of $10,000. As mentioned in the previous slide, you will need to demonstrate the strong need for the project and explain that without a non-matching grant, the project will cause financial hardship to the organization. Next, you will select if your organization has cash reserves and if they are restricted for other uses. Your financial statements will reflect this information. Now indicate by selecting yes or no if your organization had to provide a match for the project if the project would still move forward.
This concludes today's information session on the project eligibility, the application form, the grant agreement, and the budget of the CHIP program. Thank you for watching. For more information, please contact Community Grants.